Before a single pyramid rose from the desert plateau, before the first pharaoh claimed dominion over two lands, a nameless ruler at Hierakonpolis was buried with ivory figurines, lapis lazuli beads, and the bones of sacrificed servants. That burial, dating to roughly 3,200 years before Christ, tells us something extraordinary. The idea of divine kingship, of absolute power sanctified by the gods, was already taking root in the Nile Valley more than 5,000 years ago. What followed was the longest continuous civilization in human history. 3,000 years of pharaohs, temples, conquests, and collapses, all bound to a single river flowing through a desert. This is the complete story. From the scattered farming villages of the Predynastic age to the unification under Nama, from the staggering ambition of the pyramid builders to the fragmentation that followed, from the golden age of empire when Egyptian armies reached the Euphrates to the heretic king who tried to erase the gods. This journey follows the ordinary lives of scribes, farmers, and tomb builders alongside the grand campaigns of Thutmose III and Ramesses II. It traces the invasions of the Hyksos, the Sea Peoples, the Assyrians, and the Persians. It watches as Greek pharaohs build Alexandria into the ancient world's greatest city, and as Cleopatra VII gambles everything on Rome's and loses. And it follows the afterlife of this civilization, the last hieroglyph carved in 394 of the Common Era, the rediscovery by modern archaeology, and the legacy that still shapes how humanity understands power, death, and eternity. Every alphabet traces its ancestry to Egyptian writing. Every obelisk standing in Rome, Paris, or New York carries this story forward. Egypt is not merely ancient history. It is the foundation beneath much of what came after. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where the desert once turned green, where the river first drew wanderers to its banks. The desert remembers what the river has forgotten. Beneath the sands west of the Nile, where today nothing lives, stone tools lie scattered across ancient lake beds, hand axes, scrapers, blades of chipped flint, remnants of a green Sahara that once sustained vast herds of cattle, antelope, and the people who followed them. For thousands of years before anyone imagined a pharaoh, nomadic bands roamed this grassland under seasonal rains, painting images of swimming figures and long-horned cattle on rock shelters, fishing in shallow lakes that no longer exist. Then slowly, beginning around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the rains began to fail. The drying unfolded across centuries. Lakes shrank to marshes, marshes to cracked mud, mud to sand. Generation by generation, communities drifted eastward toward the one water source that never failed, the Nile. Its annual flood, fed by Ethiopian monsoons far to the south, deposited rich black silt across a narrow floodplain hemmed between limestone cliffs. Here, in this ribbon of fertility cutting through absolute desert, displaced pastoralists became farmers. By around 5,500 years before the Common Era, permanent settlements dot the valley's edge. At Merimda Beni Salama in the western delta, oval huts of wattle and daub cluster together, their floors sunk slightly below ground level. Grain storage pits hold emmer wheat and barley. Nearby at Fayum, communities cultivate flax for linen and herd pigs alongside cattle and sheep brought from the Levant. These are not cities. They are villages of perhaps a few hundred souls, bound by kinship and the rhythm of the flood. Further south, around 4,400 years before the Common Era, the Badarian culture emerges along the east bank between modern Asyut and Kau el-Kabir. Badarian graves reveal a people of surprising sophistication. The dead lie curled on their left sides, facing west, wrapped in animal skins or fine linen. Beside them rest offerings, ivory combs carved with geometric patterns, shell bracelets, copper beads traded from the eastern desert or Sinai, and pottery of extraordinary thinness with rippled surfaces burnished to a deep brown black. These vessels, fired with their rims deliberately blackened by being inverted in smouldering chaff, represent some of the finest hand-built ceramics ever produced without a potter's wheel. The Badarian dead are not buried equally. Some graves contain only a pot and a flint blade. Others overflow with ivory, malachite, turquoise, and steatite. Social hierarchy has already taken root in the Nile Valley, expressed not through palaces or written decrees, but through what accompanies a body into the earth. From the Badarian tradition grows the Naqada culture, named for the site excavated by Flinders Petrie in 1894. Naqada stretches across 1,000 years in 3 phases. In its earliest expression, called Naqada I or the Amratian phase, beginning around 3,900 years before the Common Era, settlements expand along the upper Egyptian valley between Abydos and Hierakonpolis. White cross-lined pottery appears, red polished vessels painted with geometric designs, hunting scenes, and images of hippos and crocodiles in white pigment. Flint knapping reaches extraordinary refinement. Bifacial knives with pressure-flaked edges rival any stone tool produced anywhere on Earth. Communities grow larger. Irrigation channels begin to appear, simple cuts in the natural levees that direct receding floodwaters into basins, extending the growing season. Emmer wheat, barley, and lentils fill granaries built of mud brick. Cattle herds mark wealth, and at the margins of settlements, cemeteries expand outward, each generation adding its dead to the ancestral ground, binding the living to a specific place along the river. The Nile is no longer merely a water source. It is becoming a homeland, a territory worth organizing, defending, and eventually ruling. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, a single ruler claims dominion over the entire length of the Nile. The Nama palette, carved in green siltstone, depicts a king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one face and the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other, smiting enemies, inspecting rows of decapitated corpses. Whether this unification happened in a single campaign or across generations of warfare matters less than what follows. The invention of a state unlike anything the world has seen. Memphis rises where the valley meets the delta, a strategic hinge between 2 Egypts. Mud brick walls enclose royal compounds. A new class of administrators emerges, their authority inscribed on cylinder seals and ivory labels in the earliest full hieroglyphic script. The kings of the first and second dynasties are buried at Abydos in timber-lined chambers surrounded by subsidiary graves, servants and courtiers interred alongside their sovereign, accompanying him into eternity. The state is already thinking in terms of forever. For 5 centuries, the early dynastic kings consolidate. They standardize weights and measures, establish taxation on agricultural surplus, and create the office of vizier, a chief minister who oversees justice, treasury, and public works. Nomes, the provincial districts, receive appointed governors. Copper tools improve. Shipbuilding advances. Cedar arrives from Byblos. And then, around 2667 before the Common Era, a king named Djoser commissions his architect Imhotep to build something unprecedented. At Saqqara, on the desert plateau overlooking Memphis, Imhotep stacks 6 diminishing mastabas atop one another. The step pyramid rises 62 meters above the sand, the first monumental stone structure in human history. Its casing of fine Tura limestone gleams white against the tawny desert. Around it spreads a vast enclosure of ceremonial courtyards, chapels, and colonnades, all rendered in stone, yet imitating the forms of reed bundles and wooden posts. Architecture has leaped from the perishable to the eternal in a single generation. The theological logic is absolute. The king is not merely a ruler, he is a living god, the embodiment of Horus on earth, who upon death becomes Osiris and ensures cosmic order persists. The pyramid is his vehicle of transfiguration, a stairway or ramp by which the royal spirit ascends to join the circumpolar stars that never set. Every block quarried, every ramp built, every ration of bread and beer distributed to laborers serves this divine purpose. Sneferu, first king of the 4th dynasty, refines the form through trial. His bent pyramid at Dashur changes angle midway, an engineering correction preserved in stone. His red pyramid nearby achieves the first true smooth-sided geometry. His son Khufu perfects it. The Great Pyramid at Giza, completed around 2560 before the Common Era, stands 146 meters tall, assembled from approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, averaging 2.5 tons each. Internal passages lead to the Grand Gallery, a corbelled masterpiece of precision masonry, and the King's Chamber, roofed with 9 granite slabs weighing 45 tons apiece, quarried at Aswan and transported 800 kilometers by river. This is not slave labor. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages at Giza reveals a rotating labor force of perhaps 20,000 men, organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu, fed on cattle, bread, and beer, treated by physicians, and buried in modest tombs near the monuments they raised. The Pyramid Project is a national enterprise, a mechanism that binds the provinces to the crown through shared purpose and redistributed wealth. Khafra builds the second Giza pyramid and carves the Great Sphinx from a limestone outcrop, a lion's body with a royal head, guardian of the necropolis. Menkaure completes the trio on a smaller scale. Around them spread fields of mastaba tombs belonging to viziers, priests, and officials whose afterlives depend on proximity to divine kingship. By the 5th dynasty, solar theology expands. Kings build sun temples at Abu Ghurab with open-air altars oriented to the horizon. The pyramid texts, carved inside the burial chamber of Unas around 2345 before the Common Era, constitute humanity's oldest religious literature, spells ensuring the king's celestial journey. Yet power is quietly dispersing. Provincial governors grow hereditary. Royal pyramids shrink. The resources that once flowed exclusively towards the crown now sustain local elites across 42 nomes. The architecture of eternity has begun to fracture from within. The fracture that began in the provinces now tears the state apart. Pepi II, who ascended the throne as a child around 2278 before the Common Era, reigns for perhaps 94 years, the longest documented rule in human history. By the time he dies, an extraordinarily aged king, the mechanisms of succession have atrophied. His court has outlived its own capacity to govern. Nomarchs who once served at royal pleasure now pass their titles to sons without seeking permission from Memphis. The center holds no one's loyalty. What follows is not a single catastrophic event, but a slow unraveling. The 6th dynasty ends in confusion. The 7th and 8th dynasties at Memphis produce ephemeral kings whose names barely survive, some ruling only months. Nile flood records suggest a series of low inundations beginning around 2200 before the Common Era, possibly linked to a broader climatic shift across the eastern Mediterranean. Famine texts from later periods recall these decades with horror. Fields crack under insufficient water, granaries empty. Villages that once sent surplus grain to royal storehouses now hoard what little they harvest. Two rival centers emerge from the chaos. At Heracleopolis, near the entrance to the Fayum, the 9th and 10th dynasties claim national kingship. Their authority extends across the Delta and Middle Egypt, but it is contested, fragile, dependent on alliances with local strongmen. Far to the south, at Thebes, a city of modest importance during the Old Kingdom, a family of provincial rulers begins consolidating Upper Egypt under the 11th dynasty. The god Amun, previously a minor deity, rises with them. For over a century, these two houses wage intermittent war across the Middle Nile. Tomb inscriptions from provincial governors at Asyut and Beni Hassan record local conflicts, cattle raids, and defensive walls built to protect known boundaries. Egypt has become a patchwork of armed territories. Around 2055, before the Common Era, Mentuhotep II of Thebes achieves what generations failed to accomplish. His armies push north, defeat the Heracleopolitan coalition, and reunify the two lands under a single crown. His mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, built against the western cliffs at Thebes, announces a new architectural vision. Terraced colonnades rising towards the mountain, a statement of renewed divine authority rooted not in Memphis, but in the south. The Middle Kingdom that follows reaches its administrative peak under the 12th dynasty, founded around 1985 before the Common Era, when the vizier Amenemhat seizes the throne. This dynasty governs from Ichtawi, a new capital near the Fayum, and institutes reforms that reshape Egyptian governance for centuries. The office of nomarch is gradually curtailed. Royal officials replace hereditary governors. A professional bureaucracy, trained in scribal schools, administers taxation, justice, and labor conscription with unprecedented precision. Senusret III, reigning around 1870 to 1831 before the Common Era, campaigns deep into Nubia, establishing massive mud-brick fortresses at Buhan, Semna, and Uronarti along the Second Cataract. These garrisons control gold trade and project military power southward with a sophistication the Old Kingdom never achieved. His boundary stelae warn future kings never to retreat from these positions. Literature flourishes. The tale of Sinuhe, composed during this era, narrates an official's flight abroad and longing for Egypt, a masterwork of narrative prose. The instruction of Amenemhat and the prophecy of Neferti explore kingship, loyalty, and cosmic order with philosophical depth. The Middle Kingdom becomes Egypt's classical age of language and letters. Amenemhat III directs extraordinary hydraulic engineering in the Fayum Depression, expanding Lake Moeris as a flood control reservoir and reclaiming thousands of acres of agricultural land. His two pyramids, at Dashur and Hawara, and the labyrinthine mortuary temple at Hawara astonish later Greek visitors. Yet after 1800 before the Common Era, the dynasty falters. Short reigns, a female pharaoh named Sobekneferu ruling briefly, and unclear succession signal institutional exhaustion. The 13th dynasty produces dozens of kings in rapid succession, none strong enough to prevent the slow infiltration of Asiatic settlers into the eastern delta, a migration that will soon transform into conquest. The settlers become rulers. By 1650 before the Common Era, a dynasty of Asiatic chieftains controls the eastern delta and much of Lower Egypt, from a fortified capital the Egyptians call Avaris, modern Tel el-Daba, where excavations reveal a city unlike anything along the Nile. Levantine-style temples with broad courtyards face east rather than west. Mud brick houses follow Syrian plans with central hearths. Burials contain bronze toggle pins, painted Minoan-style frescoes, and the bones of donkeys sacrificed at doorways in Canaanite fashion. This is a Near Eastern city planted on Egyptian soil. The Egyptians name these rulers Hatshepsut, chieftains of foreign lands, which Greek historians later render as Hyksos. The 15th dynasty they establish governs from Avaris with a blend of Asiatic and Egyptian administrative practice. Their kings adopt hieroglyphic titulary, use the title Son of Ra, and worship Set as an equivalent of their storm god. Yet they also maintain connections to the Levantine world, importing olive oil, cedar, copper, and military technology that transforms warfare across the eastern Mediterranean. The chariot arrives in Egypt under Hyksos rule. Light, spoke-wheeled vehicles drawn by paired horses give their warriors devastating mobility on the flat delta terrain. Composite bows laminated from horn, wood, and sinew outrange the simple self-bows Egyptian archers have carried for centuries. Bronze kepesh swords, body armor of leather and bronze scales, and new dagger forms appear in the archaeological record. The Hyksos do not merely occupy, they revolutionize the technology of war. South of their domain, a diminished Egyptian state survives. The 17th dynasty rules from Thebes, controlling Upper Egypt from roughly Abydos to the First Cataract. These Theban kings pay tribute northward and endure the humiliation of divided sovereignty. Their territory is wealthy in grain and gold from Nubian trade, but their military resources remain limited. For nearly a century, an uneasy coexistence holds. Then war comes. Sekenenre Tao, ruling from Thebes around 1560 before the Common Era, initiates hostilities against the Hyksos king Apepi. The evidence is written on his body. His mummy, recovered from the Deir el-Bahari cache, displays catastrophic skull wounds, an axe blow above the left eye, a dagger thrust behind the left ear, a mace strike that shattered the cheekbone. These are wounds inflicted by Asiatic weapons. Sekenenre dies in battle or is executed after capture, but his war does not die with him. His son Thutmose takes the throne and the fight forward. The Carnarvon tablet and stele erected at Karnak preserve his words in the third person. Declarations of fury at ruling only a portion of Egypt, while an Asiatic sits in Avaris and a Nubian controls the south. Around 1555 before the Common Era, Thutmose launches a river campaign northward, his war fleet striking deep into Hyksos territory. He intercepts a messenger carrying a letter from Apepi to the ruler of Kush, attempting to coordinate a two-front war against Thebes. Thutmose raids the outskirts of Avaris itself, but cannot take the fortified city. He dies shortly after, perhaps from wounds. The final blow falls under Ahmose I, brother of Kamose, who reaches maturity and commands the resources of a fully mobilized Upper Egypt. Around 1550 before the Common Era, Ahmose besieges and captures Avaris. The city's destruction layers, visible in excavation, mark the end of Hyksos power in Egypt. But Ahmose pursues further. He campaigns into southern Canaan and besieges the fortress of Sheruhen for 3 years, eliminating any possibility of Hyksos' return. He then turns south, reasserting control over Lower Nubia. With these victories, Ahmose founds the 18th dynasty and inaugurates what later ages call the New Kingdom. Egypt emerges from a century of foreign domination transformed. The chariot, the composite bow, the bronze-scaled corselet, all weapons introduced by the conquerors, now belong to the conqueror's conquerors. The Theban royal house has learned that isolation invites invasion. The lesson reshapes Egyptian grand strategy for centuries to come. Security demands empire. The lesson reshapes not only strategy, but the very character of the Egyptian state. Within 2 generations of Ahmose's victories, the Theban monarchy transforms from a regional power defending its borders into an imperial machine projecting force across the entire eastern Mediterranean world. Ahmose's son Amenhotep I consolidates the reconquered territories, campaigns into Nubia beyond the Second Cataract, and establishes the administrative framework that will sustain empire. He founds the artisan village at Deir el-Medina on the west bank of Thebes, a community of skilled craftsmen whose descendants will carve and paint royal tombs for 5 centuries. When he dies without a surviving male heir around 1493 before the Common Era, the throne passes to a military commander named Thutmose, who marries into the royal line and campaigns deep into Nubia and the Levant during a brief but vigorous reign. It is Thutmose I's granddaughter who will redefine what pharaonic power means. Hatshepsut, daughter of Thutmose I and great royal wife Ahmose, initially serves as regent for her young stepson Thutmose III. But within 7 years she assumes the full titulary of kingship, the double crown, the false beard, the crook and flail. She rules as pharaoh for over 2 decades, from approximately 1479 to 1458 before the Common Era, and her reign is no mere interregnum. It is an era of monumental ambition. At Deir el-Bahari, on the western bank opposite Thebes, her mortuary temple rises in 3 colonnaded terraces against the golden limestone cliffs. The architecture is unlike anything Egypt has produced, open, light-filled, ascending toward the sacred mountain in broad horizontal lines rather than the vertical mass of pyramids. Ramps connect each level. Painted reliefs along the colonnades record the defining achievement of her reign, the expedition to the land of Punt. Around 1473 before the Common Era, 5 great ships depart for the distant southern coast, likely along the Red Sea shore of modern Eritrea or Somalia. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari depict the voyage in extraordinary detail. The ships under sail, the stilt houses of Punt's villages, the obese queen of Punt greeting Egyptian envoys, and the treasures loaded aboard for the return, living myrrh trees in baskets of earth, ebony, ivory, gold rings, cinnamon, incense, baboons, and exotic animal skins. 31 myrrh trees are transplanted to the temple terraces, their roots carried across hundreds of miles of sea and desert. Hatshepsut's reign emphasizes trade, temple construction, and theological legitimacy over military conquest, though garrisons remain active in Nubia and the Levant. She quarries obelisks at Aswan, 2 red granite shafts, each nearly 30 meters tall, erected at Karnak in honor of her divine father Amun. When Hatshepsut dies around 1458, Thutmose III emerges from decades of nominal co-regency into sole rule. He is already a mature man, trained in military arts, and he acts immediately. Within months of her death, he marches an army of perhaps 20,000 soldiers through the Sinai and into Canaan, where a coalition of Levantine city-states has gathered at the fortress of Megiddo under the Prince of Kadesh. The Battle of Megiddo, around 1457 before the Common Era, becomes the first military engagement recorded in reliable detail. Thutmose's annals, inscribed on the walls of Karnak Temple, describe the war council, the 3 possible approach routes, and the king's bold decision to advance through the narrow Aruna Pass despite the risk of ambush. The gamble succeeds. Egyptian forces emerge onto the plain before Megiddo and rout the surprised coalition. The city falls after a 7-month siege. Over the next 2 decades, Thutmose conducts at least 17 campaigns. He crosses the Euphrates River in his 8th campaign, erecting a victory stela beside that of his grandfather. Mitanni, the great Hurrian kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia, sends tribute. The ports of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre provision Egyptian fleets. Nubian gold flows north from mines beyond the 4th cataract. Tribute lists at Karnak enumerate copper, lapis lazuli, horses, chariots, slaves, and timber from lands stretching 1,500 kilometers from the Nile. Egypt stands at the center of the late Bronze Age world, its treasury overflowing, its temples expanding, its armies unchallenged from the cataracts to the river bend of the Euphrates. The empire's wealth now turns inward. In the decades following Thutmose III's conquests, his successors inherit a kingdom so rich that its energies shift from battlefield expansion to architectural splendor and diplomatic finesse. Amenhotep II and Thutmose IV maintain the empire through selective campaigns and strategic marriages, but it is Amenhotep III who transforms Egypt into something unprecedented, a court of such opulence that foreign kings write to him begging for gold, insisting that in Egypt it is as plentiful as dust. Amenhotep III ascends the throne around 1390 before the Common Era and rules for nearly 4 decades. His Egypt does not need to conquer. It needs only to dazzle. At Thebes, on the western bank, he raises a palace complex at Malkata, sprawling mud-brick halls with painted floors depicting marshlands teeming with fish and birds, audience chambers sheathed in faience tiles of cobalt and turquoise. Across the river, his mortuary temple surpasses all predecessors in scale, though little survives today beyond the 2 colossal quartzite statues that once flanked its entrance, the Colossi of Memnon, each standing 18 meters high, carved from single blocks, transported 700 kilometers from quarries near modern Cairo. The diplomatic archive discovered at Amarna reveals the texture of this world. Clay tablets inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform preserve correspondence between the Egyptian court and the kings of Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria, Hatti, and Cyprus. They negotiate marriages, exchange gold and lapis lazuli, complain of delayed gifts, and maintain the elaborate fiction of brotherhood among great kings. Amenhotep III marries a Mitannian princess, then another. His chief queen Ti, daughter of a provincial official named Yuya, wields extraordinary influence, corresponding directly with foreign rulers. Yet beneath this golden surface, theological tensions gather. The sun god in his visible disk form, the Aten-ti, receives increasing emphasis during Amenhotep III's later years. When his son ascends the throne around 1352 as Amenhotep IV, this emphasis becomes revolution. Within 5 years, the new king changes his name to Akhenaten, effective spirit of the Aten, and declares the visible sun disk the sole god worthy of worship. He orders the closure of Amun temples throughout Egypt, dispatches agents to chisel the name of Amun from monuments, and diverts the vast temple revenues to his new deity. Around 1346, Akhenaten abandons Thebes entirely. 300 kilometers north, on virgin ground where the eastern cliffs curve toward the river, he founds Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. Boundary stelae carved into surrounding cliffs demarcate the sacred precinct. The city rises rapidly, open-air temples without roofs, designed so sunlight floods directly onto altars, royal palaces connected by a bridge spanning the central road, administrative buildings, workers' villages, and suburbs for courtiers. The art that decorates these spaces breaks every convention. The royal family appears with elongated skulls, pendulous bellies, and thin limbs. Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti are shown kissing their daughters, riding chariots together, making offerings side by side beneath the Aten's radiating hands. Nefertiti's prominence is extraordinary. She appears in scenes of smiting enemies, a posture reserved exclusively for pharaohs. Evidence suggests she may have served as co-regent under the name Neferuaten. The painted limestone bust discovered in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, with its elegant symmetry and serene authority, captures the image of a woman who stood at the very center of power. But the revolution fractures consensus. The priesthood of Amun loses everything. Provincial elites watch their patron deities declared irrelevant. The diplomatic archive shows vassal states pleading for military aid that never arrives, Akhenaten's attention fixed inward on theology, while Hittite power expands into Egyptian territory in Syria. After approximately 17 years of rule, Akhenaten dies around 1336. Within a decade, his successors, likely including the young Tutankhamun, restore Amun worship, abandon Akhetaten to the desert, and begin erasing the heretic king's name from history. The city's mud-brick walls dissolve slowly back into the earth, preserving beneath sand the record of the most radical experiment in pharaonic history. The boy king inherits a shattered consensus. Tutankhamun, perhaps 9 years old when he takes the throne around 1336 before the Common Era, bears a name that itself signals restoration, the living image of Amun, not the Aten. His advisors, chief among them the general Horemheb and the elderly courtier Ai, guide the young pharaoh through a systematic reversal of everything Akhenaten built. The restoration stela erected at Karnak declares that the temples had fallen to ruin, that the gods had turned their backs on Egypt. Amun's priesthood returns to power. Thebes reclaims its spiritual primacy. The court abandons Akhetaten permanently, relocating first to Memphis and then re-establishing the traditional circuits of royal authority along the river. Tutankhamun dies around 1327, barely 20 years old, his body placed in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, tomb number 62, surrounded by golden shrines, a solid gold innermost coffin weighing over 100 kilograms, and a funerary mask of beaten gold inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian that will become the most recognized artifact of Egyptian civilization. His successor rules briefly before Horemheb, the military strongman, seizes the throne and begins the deeper work of institutional repair. Horemheb's reforms reorganize the army, purge corrupt officials, restore judicial order in the provinces, and systematically dismantle Akhenaten's monuments, reusing their stone blocks as fill inside new pylons at Karnak. Having no son, Horemheb designates his vizier, a fellow military man from the eastern delta named Paramessu, as heir. Paramessu becomes Ramesses I around 1295, founding the 19th dynasty. His reign lasts barely 2 years, but his son Seti I immediately projects Egyptian power back into Asia with a vigor unseen since Thutmose III. Seti campaigns through Canaan, clashes with Hittite forces in Syria, and recaptures the fortress city of Kadesh, though he cannot hold it permanently. At Abydos, Seti constructs a temple of extraordinary refinement, its raised relief carvings among the finest in Egyptian art. The dynasty's roots in the delta city of Avaris, once the Hyksos capital, signal a northward shift in Egypt's strategic orientation, facing the Levantine frontier. When Seti dies around 1279, his son ascends as Ramesses II, approximately 25 years old, already co-regent and battle-tested. The reign that follows stretches 66 years, the longest confirmed rule in pharaonic history. In his 5th year, around 1274, Ramesses marches north with an army of 20,000 men organized into 4 divisions named for the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth. At Kadesh on the Orontes River, Hittite king Muwatalli II springs an ambush with massed chariotry that nearly destroys the Egyptian force. Ramesses rallies his household troops, fights through encirclement, and claims divine victory, though the battle ends in strategic stalemate, with Kadesh remaining in Hittite hands. The propaganda of Kadesh adorns temple walls across Egypt, but the geopolitical reality demands diplomacy. Around 1259, Ramesses and Hittite king Hattusili III conclude a formal peace treaty, preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform, establishing mutual non-aggression, extradition of fugitives, and defensive alliance. A Hittite princess enters Ramesses's harem, sealing the accord. Freed from perpetual war, Ramesses builds on a scale unmatched by any pharaoh. At Abu Simbel in Lower Nubia, 4 colossal seated figures of the king, each 20 meters tall, guard a rock-cut temple aligned so that sunlight penetrates the sanctuary twice yearly to illuminate the gods within. At Thebes, the Ramesseum rises as his mortuary temple. In the delta, the new capital Pi Ramesses sprawls across 15 square kilometers, a city of glazed tile palaces, military barracks, bronze foundries, and chariot workshops, its population perhaps 300,000. Ramesses fathers over 100 children by numerous wives, outlives many of his sons, and dies around 1213 at approximately 90 years of age. His mummified body, red-haired and tall, survives to the present day in the Cairo Museum, the physical remains of a king who made himself eternal in stone across 2 continents. Beyond the monuments and the wars, beyond the colossal statuary and the royal cartouches, the Nile Valley pulses with a quieter rhythm, the rhythm of bread rising in clay ovens, of beer fermenting in ceramic vats, of shadda farms lifting water to garden plots, of children reciting lessons on limestone flakes. The new kingdom at its zenith supports perhaps 3 to 4 million people, and the overwhelming majority never see the inside of a palace. Their world turns on the river. 3 seasons govern existence. Akhet, the inundation, begins in late June when the Nile swells with Ethiopian monsoon rains, spreading nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain for 4 months. Pare, the growing season, follows from October through February. Fields of emmer wheat and barley emerge from the receding waters. Shemu, the harvest and dry season, stretches from March into June, a time of reaping, threshing, and storing grain before the cycle begins again. Every farming family understands this calendar in their bones. State granaries collect surplus as taxation, measured by scribes who record each household's yield on papyrus rolls. On the west bank of Thebes, tucked into a desert valley, the village of Deir el-Medina houses the artisans who carve and paint the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Some 70 families live within mud-brick walls, stonemasons, plasterers, draftsmen, painters, organized into left and right gangs under foremen. Their homes are narrow, typically 4 rooms deep, with whitewashed walls, built-in sleeping platforms, grain storage bins, and rooftop cooking areas. Thousands of ostraca, inscribed pottery sherds and limestone chips survive from this community, recording everything from work attendance to love poetry, from laundry lists to legal disputes. These fragments reveal a literate working class unprecedented in the ancient world, where perhaps 5 to 10% of the general population can read, but at Deir el-Medina the rate approaches near universality among men. Bread and beer form the twin pillars of the Egyptian diet and economy. Workers receive daily rations, typically 10 loaves and a measure of beer, as wages. Bakers grind emmer on saddle querns, mix dough with water, and sometimes dates or honey, and bake in preheated conical molds. Brewers crumble lightly baked bread into water, add dates for sweetness, and allow fermentation in large vats. The resulting thick, nutritious beverage sustains laborers through grueling shifts. Medical knowledge reaches remarkable sophistication. The Edwin Smith papyrus, likely copied during the New Kingdom from an older text, presents 48 surgical cases with rational diagnoses and treatments. No magic, only observation. The Ebers papyrus catalogues over 700 remedies for ailments from eye disease to intestinal parasites. Physicians recognize the pulse as connected to the heart and prescribe willow bark, honey poultices, and opium for pain. Education begins around age 5 for boys destined for scribal careers. Students copy wisdom texts and model letters onto ostraca, graduating to papyrus only when proficient. The Satire of the Trades, a Middle Kingdom composition still used as a school text, mocks every profession except the scribes. The fisherman stinks, the soldier suffers, but the scribe sits cool and commands respect. Women hold property, initiate divorce, conduct business, and testify in court, legal rights unmatched in the contemporary ancient world. Marriage is a private arrangement without state registration, and inheritance passes to children of both sexes. The Opet festival transforms Thebes annually. For 11 to 27 days, depending on the rain, the cult statue of Amun travels by sacred bark from Karnak to Luxor Temple, amid music, dancing, acrobatic performances, and the distribution of bread, beer, and meat to the populace. The entire city becomes a stage for divine renewal. In 1152 before the Common Era, tomb workers at Deir el-Medina stage history's first recorded labor strike. Their grain rations have not arrived for 20 days. They march to the mortuary temples, sit down, and refuse to work until officials deliver food. The scribes record their grievance without apparent shame, a testament to a society where even laborers possess recognized rights within the cosmic order that the pharaoh is sworn to maintain. Ramesses the Great dies around 1213 before the Common Era, and the empire he held together through sheer longevity begins to fracture almost immediately. His 13th son, Merneptah, already elderly when he takes the throne, faces a world in motion. Libyan tribes press against the western delta, and a coalition of peoples, Shurdan, Shekelesh, Luka, Tersha, joins them in a massive assault around 1208. Merneptah defeats them decisively, recording the victory on a great stela at Thebes that also contains the earliest known reference to Israel as a people in Canaan. But the victory is a warning. The Mediterranean world is destabilizing, and Egypt stands in the path of forces it cannot permanently repel. After Merneptah's death around 1198, succession collapses into chaos. At least 4 kings claimed the throne within a decade: Amenmesse, Seti II, Siptah, and the regent queen Tausret. Legitimacy phrase. The 19th dynasty ends not with conquest but with exhaustion, and a military strongman named Setnakte seizes power around 1186, founding the 20th dynasty. His son inherits the crisis. Ramesses III ascends the throne into a world unraveling. Across the eastern Mediterranean, the Hittite Empire has fallen. Ugarit lies in ashes. Mycenaean palace centers are abandoned. A vast migration of displaced populations, the Sea Peoples, as Egyptian texts name them, sweep southward by land through the Levant and by sea along the coast. They are not a single nation, but a confederation. Peliset, Jekka, Shekelesh, Denien, and Weshesh, traveling with ox carts carrying women and children. This is not a raid. It is a migration seeking new lands. Around 1178 before the Common Era, Ramesses III meets them. The land battle unfolds somewhere along the Levantine coast or at Egypt's eastern frontier. The naval engagement takes place in one of the Nile's delta mouths. The walls of Medinet Habu, his mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, preserve the scene in extraordinary carved relief. Egyptian warships grappling enemy vessels, archers raining arrows from shore, sea people's ships capsizing, warriors drowning in tangled rigging. Egyptian soldiers haul bound captives, scribes count severed hands. The victory is total. Egypt survives where every other Bronze Age power has fallen. The Peliset are settled as garrison troops in southern Canaan, where they become the Philistines of later biblical tradition. But the triumph masks a deeper wound. The international trade networks that sustained Egyptian wealth, cedar from Byblos, copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, have collapsed. The system of diplomatic exchange among great kings, so carefully maintained since the Amarna age, no longer functions. Egypt has won the battle, but lost the world that made its empire profitable. The remaining decades of Ramesses III's reign witness slow decline. Around 1155, a conspiracy within the royal harem attempts his assassination. Court documents record the trial of dozens of conspirators, including queens and officials. The king may have died from his wounds. A CT scan of his mummy reveals a deep throat laceration. His successors, Ramesses IV through Ramesses XI, reign over a state increasingly hollow. Gold stops flowing from Nubian mines. Grain shipments falter. The tomb workers at Deir el-Medina strike repeatedly. Papyri from the reign of Ramesses IX record systematic robbery of royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, gangs of thieves stripping gold from mummies while corrupt officials look away. At Thebes, the high priests of Amun accumulate military and economic power that rivals the crown. By the reign of Ramesses XI, the high priest, Herihor, inscribes his name within a royal cartouche and assumes pharaonic titles in Upper Egypt. The fiction of unity persists, but two separate administrations govern, one at Tanis in the Delta, one at Thebes. Around 1069 before the Common Era, Ramesses XI dies, and no successor reunites the land. The new kingdom ends not with a foreign invasion or a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet administrative partition. 3,000 years of pharaonic tradition continue, but the empire that once reached the Euphrates has contracted to the river valley itself, and the age of Egyptian dominance over the ancient world has passed into memory. The partition settles into permanence. At Tanis in the northeastern delta, Smendes I establishes the 21st dynasty around 1069 before the Common Era, ruling from a city built partly with stones dismantled from the old Ramesside capital of Pi-Ramesses. The royal tombs at Tanis, cut into the temple precinct rather than hidden in remote valleys, hold silver coffins and gold funerary masks, treasures that rival Tutankhamun's burial, yet reflect a diminished kingdom. Susenes I, who reigns for nearly half a century, is interred in a silver coffin of extraordinary craftsmanship, surrounded by gold vessels and lapis lazuli amulets. But his domain extends only across the delta and parts of Middle Egypt. To the south, the high priests of Amun at Thebes govern as quasi-independent rulers. They command the vast temple estates of Karnak, control Nubian gold routes, and maintain their own military forces. The two administrations coexist through dynastic marriages and diplomatic correspondence, a careful equilibrium sustained by shared religious obligations. The Oracle of Amun at Karnak becomes the supreme judicial and political authority in the south, its pronouncements guiding decisions of state. This fragile balance shifts decisively around 945 before the Common Era, when Libyan military families, descendants of Meshwesh and Libu warriors, settled in the delta as garrison troops during the Ramesside period, accumulate enough power to claim the throne itself. Shoshenq I, a Libyan chieftain from Bubastis, founds the 22nd dynasty around 943. He attempts to reunify Egypt by installing his son as High Priest of Amun at Thebes, binding north and south through family ties rather than conquest. Around 925, Shoshenq launches a military campaign into the Levant, raiding the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, an event recorded both on the Bubastite portal at Karnak and in Hebrew scripture, where he appears as Shishak. Yet Libyan rule never achieves true centralization. By the mid-9th century, rival Libyan dynasts establish the 23rd dynasty at Leontopolis, while local chiefs across the delta govern as virtually independent princes. Egypt fractures into a patchwork of competing lordships, Hermopolis, Heracleopolis, Sais, and other cities each under their own strongman. The great temples still function, priests still perform the daily rituals, but no single authority commands the two lands. From the south, a power rises that none of these fractious lords can match. The kingdom of Kush, centered at Napata near the Fourth Cataract, has absorbed centuries of Egyptian cultural influence. Its kings worship Amun, build pyramids at El Kuru, and consider themselves the true guardians of pharaonic tradition. Around 727 before the Common Era, the Kushite king Piye marches north with overwhelming force. His victory stela, discovered at Gebel Barkal, records a methodical campaign, city after city submitting, local rulers prostrating themselves before a conqueror who presents himself not as a foreigner, but as the restorer of divine order. Piye reunifies Egypt under the 25th dynasty, then returns to Napata, leaving his conquered territories under loyal governors. His successors Shabaka and Taharqa consolidate Nubian control over all Egypt. Taharqa, reigning from around 690 to 664, proves an ambitious builder, restoring temples at Karnak, constructing a colonnade at the first court, and raising monuments across both Egypt and Nubia. But his ambition collides with the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire. Esarhaddon invades in 671, driving Taharqa from Memphis. Taharqa retakes the north briefly, but Ashurbanipal returns in 663 with devastating force. Assyrian armies march the length of Egypt and sack Thebes itself, plundering the treasury of Amun, carrying off obelisks and statuary, and inflicting a humiliation so profound that the Hebrew prophet Nahum later invokes it as a measure of divine wrath. The 25th dynasty retreats permanently to Nubia, and Egypt passes under Assyrian vassalage, its ancient independence shattered, its sacred city violated, and its future now dependent on whatever local dynasty can navigate the dangerous space between Assyrian power and Egyptian pride. From the ashes of Assyrian vassalage, a new dynasty rises in the western delta. Psamtik I, originally installed as a puppet governor by Ashurbanipal, exploits Assyria's growing distraction with Babylonian revolt and Median pressure to consolidate independent power. By 654 before the Common Era, he has unified Egypt under the 26th dynasty, ruling from the ancient delta city of Sais. His method is pragmatic. Greek and Carian mercenaries form the backbone of his military, their bronze armor and hoplite discipline providing an edge that native levies alone cannot match. Assyrian garrisons withdraw without a fight, their empire crumbling under its own overextension. The Scythe Renaissance that follows is deliberately archaizing. Sculptors study old kingdom models with scholarly precision, producing bronze and stone statuary that echoes forms 2,000 years old, the serene faces, the striding poses, the pleated kilts of a vanished age. Temple inscriptions adopt archaic spellings. Administrative titles dormant for centuries reappear in official documents. This is not mere nostalgia, but political theology. The Saïta kings present themselves as restorers of eternal order, erasing the centuries of Libyan and Nubian rule as aberrations now corrected. Psamtik's son Necho II pushes Egypt's ambitions outward. He begins construction of a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, a project that reportedly costs the lives of 120,000 laborers before its abandonment. More remarkably, around 600 before the Common Era, he dispatches Phoenician sailors on a voyage that circumnavigates the African continent, a feat reported by Herodotus with skepticism, but now considered plausible by modern scholars. Necho also intervenes in the collapsing Assyrian Empire's death throes, marching north to support Assyria's remnant against Babylon, defeating King Josiah of Judah at Megiddo in 609 before the Common Era. But Babylon proves the stronger power. Nebuchadnezzar II defeats Necho at Carchemish in 605, ending Egyptian ambitions in the Levant permanently. The later Saite kings, Psamtik II, Apries, and Amasis, maintain prosperity through Mediterranean trade, particularly with Greek merchants settled at Naucratis in the Delta, but Egypt's military reach contracts to its own borders and the Libyan frontier. The blow falls in 525, before the Common Era. Cambyses II of Persia invades, defeating Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. Ancient sources claim the Persians drove sacred cats before their army, exploiting Egyptian religious scruples, likely apocryphal, but the defeat is real and total. Egypt becomes a satrapy of the Achaemenid Empire, its temples generally respected, but its wealth now flowing to Persepolis. Darius I completes Necho's abandoned canal and rules with relative tolerance, but Persian governors grow increasingly extractive. In 404 before the Common Era, Amerteus of Sais leads a successful revolt, founding the brief 28th dynasty as sole pharaoh. The 29th dynasty at Mendes and then the 30th dynasty under Nectanebo I continue native independence for 6 decades. Nectanebo builds magnificently. His additions to Philae Temple, his enclosure wall at Karnak, and temples across the land represent a final flowering of pharaonic architecture. His grandson, Nectanebo II, repels a Persian invasion in 351 before the Common Era, but a second assault in 343 succeeds. The last native pharaoh flees to Nubia, and Egypt falls again under Persian dominion. This second Persian occupation proves brief and brutal. When Alexander of Macedon defeats Darius III at Issus in 333, Egypt's Persian garrison offers little resistance. Alexander enters the country in 332 before the Common Era, welcomed as liberator. He sacrifices to Apis at Memphis, then journeys through the western desert to the oracle of Amun at Siwa, where priests reportedly greet him as son of the god. On the Mediterranean coast, he marks the boundaries of a new city, Alexandria, before departing eastward, never to return alive. Egypt passes from Persian to Macedonian hands, its pharaonic traditions intact, but its political independence now entrusted to foreign kings who will wear the double crown in a language the Nile Valley has never spoken. Alexander dies in Babylon in 323 before the Common Era, and his empire shatters among his generals. Egypt falls to Ptolemy, son of Lagos, a childhood companion and trusted cavalry commander who seizes Alexander's corpse during its funeral procession and diverts it to Memphis. This act of calculated audacity, possessing the body of the god-king, legitimizes his claim. By 305, Ptolemy formally declares himself pharaoh, taking the epithet Soter, the savior, and founding a dynasty that will rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Alexandria rises from the limestone ridge between Lake Mareotis and the Mediterranean. The city Alexander sketched in flour and chalk becomes, under Ptolemy I and his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the greatest metropolis of the Hellenistic world. A causeway called the Heptastadion connects the mainland to Pharos Island, creating 2 vast harbors, the Great Harbor to the east, the Harbor of Good Return to the west. On Pharos itself, the lighthouse ascends in 3 tiers, square, octagonal, cylindrical, to a height ancient sources estimate at over 100 meters, its mirror-reflected flame visible far out to sea. It becomes one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Within the royal quarter, the Ptolemies establish the Mouseion, a research institution housing scholars, poets, mathematicians, and physicians supported by royal patronage. Its library accumulates hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, works copied from every ship entering the harbor, texts purchased from across the Mediterranean. Euclid composes his elements here. Eratosthenes calculates the circumference of the earth. Herophilus dissects human cadavers, mapping the nervous system for the first time. Alexandria becomes the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Yet the Ptolemies understand that ruling Egypt requires more than Greek learning. They adopt pharaonic titulary, appear on temple walls in traditional regalia, making offerings to Egyptian gods, and maintain the priesthoods that anchor rural society. Ptolemy II completes the temple of Isis at Philae. Ptolemy III Euergetes campaigns into Syria and returns with cult statues the Persians had stolen centuries earlier. The great temple of Horus at Edfu, begun under Ptolemy III in 237 before the Common Era and completed over 180 years later, stands today as the best-preserved temple in Egypt, its pylons, hypostyle hall, and sanctuary intact, its walls covered in ritual texts and mythological reliefs that codify millennia of theological tradition. The Rosetta Stone, carved in 196 before the Common Era under Ptolemy V Epiphanes, reveals the machinery of this dual system. Its decree, issued by a priestly synod at Memphis, appears in hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek, three scripts serving one administrative purpose, binding Greek monarchy to Egyptian temple authority through tax remissions and cult honors. But dynastic poison corrodes the system from within. Brother marries sister, uncle murders nephew, mother plots against son. Ptolemy IV Philopater defeats the Seleucids at Raphia in 217, but descends into indolence. Ptolemy VIII Physcon unleashes civil war against his own brother's widow. By the 1st century before the Common Era, Rome's shadow falls heavily across the eastern Mediterranean. Ptolemy XII Auletes maintains his throne only through massive bribes to Roman senators. His daughter Cleopatra VII takes power around 51 before the Common Era, initially sharing rule with her younger brother before civil war drives her from Alexandria. Julius Caesar arrives in pursuit of Pompey in 48 and restores her to the throne. Their alliance produces a son, Caesarion. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra binds herself to Mark Antony, a political and personal union that controls the eastern Mediterranean's wealth. Together they redistribute Roman provinces among their children in the donations of Alexandria. Octavian frames this as treason against Rome. At Actium, off the western coast of Greece, in 31 before the Common Era, Octavian's fleet under Agrippa traps Antony's heavier warships. Cleopatra's squadron breaks through the blockade and flees south. Antony follows. Their forces collapse. Within a year, Octavian stands before Alexandria. Antony falls on his sword. Cleopatra, denied the dignity of a Roman triumph, takes her own life in August of 30 before the Common Era, tradition says by Asp, though the method remains uncertain. She is 39 years old, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last pharaoh. Egypt becomes a Roman province, its grain feeding the imperial capital, its temples still rising, its gods still worshipped, but its throne forever empty. The throne sits empty, but the temples do not fall silent. Roman prefects govern Egypt as the personal province of the emperor, its grain shipments feeding Rome's 1 million inhabitants, yet the ancient religion continues almost undisturbed. At Dendera, Construction of the great temple of Hathor proceeds under Augustus and Tiberius, its astronomical ceiling painted in deep blues and golds. At Philae, the sacred island of Isis, Roman emperors appear on temple walls in pharaonic regalia, offering to the gods in poses unchanged for 3,000 years. The priesthoods maintain their rituals, their calendar, their hieroglyphic inscriptions carved with the same precision their predecessors employed under Ramesses or Thutmose. In the Fayum oasis and across the delta, a remarkable fusion emerges. Mummy portraits painted in encaustic wax on wooden panels, startlingly lifelike faces with Roman hairstyles and Greek features, are bound into traditional Egyptian wrappings. The dead still journey westward, still require provisions, still face judgment. But the living world transforms around them. Greek remains the language of administration. Latin governs the military. Demotic Egyptian persists among the common people, evolving slowly toward what will become Coptic. Christianity arrives early. Tradition places the evangelist Mark in Alexandria around 60 of the Common Era. By the 2nd century, the catechetical school of Alexandria produces theologians who reshape Christian thought. The new faith spreads up the Nile, absorbing converts from every class. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, Egyptian Christians, Copts, from the Greek word for Egypt, develop monasticism. St. Anthony retreats into the eastern desert around 270. Pachomius establishes communal monastic life near Nag Hammadi around 320. These Egyptian innovations spread throughout Christendom. The old religion retreats but does not vanish overnight. The last known hieroglyphic inscription is carved at Philae on the 24th of August, 394 of the Common Era, a short graffito by a priest named Esmet Akhom. The last demotic inscription at Philae dates to 452. Emperor Justinian finally closes the Temple of Isis at Philae around 535, ending over 3,000 years of continuous pharaonic worship. The knowledge of hieroglyphs dies with the last priests who can read them. The script becomes mute stone. The Arab conquest of 641 brings Islam to the Nile Valley. Amr ibn al-As founds Fustat, which grows into Cairo. Arabic gradually replaces Coptic as the spoken language, though Coptic survives in liturgy. The monuments endure, too massive to destroy, too remote to dismantle entirely. But their meaning is lost. Medieval Arab scholars speculate about the pyramids. European travelers sketch ruins they cannot interpret. Then, in 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte lands at Alexandria with an army and 167 scholars. His savants measure, draw, and catalogue every accessible monument, producing the monumental Description de l'Égypte. Among their discoveries is a black granodiorite slab found at Rosetta bearing the same decree in hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. In 1822, Jean-François Champollion in Paris cracks the code, recognizing that hieroglyphs represent both sounds and ideas. The ancient voices speak again. The 19th century brings systematic archaeology. Auguste Mariette founds the Egyptian Antiquities Service in 1858, halting the uncontrolled export of treasures. Flinders Petrie introduces stratigraphic method. In 1922, Howard Carter peers into the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings and sees gold glinting in the darkness, the most complete royal burial ever found, its treasures numbering over 5,000 objects. The 20th century brings both threat and rescue. When the Aswan High Dam imperils Nubian monuments in the 1960s, a UNESCO campaign relocates Abu Simbel and Philae stone by stone. Modern Egypt claims pharaonic heritage as national identity. The flag's eagle echoes ancient symbols. School children learn of Ramesses alongside modern history. The Grand Egyptian Museum at Giza, opened in the 21st century, houses over 100,000 artifacts within sight of the pyramids themselves. Excavations at Saqqara continue to yield painted coffins and sealed tombs, proving that after more than a century of digging, the sand still holds secrets. 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization shaped the human story in ways that outlast every dynasty. The calendar, the concept of divine justice, monumental architecture as state expression, written bureaucracy, medical practice, artistic conventions that influenced Greece and Rome, all carry Egyptian fingerprints. The Nile still flows north. The pyramids still hold the horizon. And the civilization that built them remains, not as a relic, but as a living presence in the modern world. Thank you for journeying through 3,000 years along the Nile. If this story has illuminated something new, consider subscribing to the channel so future explorations of history's greatest civilizations find their way to you.